Hey, this is Emperor. I'm here at DBS Music in Bristol, and I'm going to be going through my sound design process. Thanks. Yeah, so I don't know if any of you are really familiar with my stuff, but primarily make sort of drum and bass music and do hip-hop stuff as well, and all sorts really. But today I'm going to focus on mainly like Serum and my sound design process. So I guess get right into it then. Has everybody used Serum before or heard of it? Or yeah. So it's pretty incredible synth, and this isn't an advert for Serum, by the way, but it's totally revolutionised the way I've been making bass noises, really. But I'll get right into it. So it's kind of like Massive, if you're familiar with that before, and it's very cool. So it works on within these wavetables that you've got all here. There's also some from Massive, which I've dragged back in, but I'll just go through my sort of process. So generally, I'll just try and find movements within wavetables that I quite like the sound of. I'll just grab a random one. So you can sort of go through the wavetable. You can display it laterally like this as well, so you can sort of see what it's doing. And generally, I'll just try and find little movements in the wavetable. So I'll slow it down a bit. Generally, my sound design process as well, I'm just sort of messing around most of the time, which is basically what everybody does. Just sort of playing around with the synth, trying to figure out what to do. So sort of anchor on a little movement like that, I guess. Pitch it down. Get a bit more level actually. Just put this through the mixer, one sec. Give it a bit of level. This is FL's EQ, by the way. And it sort of illuminates rather than displaying like spectrum, so it's a bit weird to look at first, but it's quite cool. Yeah, and then I'll just start playing around with adding some sort of like dimension, which is yeah, like a unison thing. Once again, just trying to add little increments of movement and stuff like that to it. Distortion as well. This is all like standard stuff, I'm sure everyone does this, but... and then I'll just add on filters and stuff like this. Usually this is my standard sort of look here. So this is a cool filter in Serum actually. In the miscellaneous section you've got all these different filters which are really, really cool. Get these nice textures and stuff like that. A bit of drive as well. And yeah, and you can sort of combine different wavetables together, which I'll start doing as well. Usually try and go for the same wavetables, but find different movements within that wavetable as well. Pitch that down. Okay. But yeah, so I'll just sort of play around with this for a little while, try and find different sort of movements and stuff. But I'm going to just go ahead and say here's one I made earlier because that's not very cool. So then I'll start actually running this through a mixer chain, and I usually start off with a reverb actually, which is a bit unorthodox, but you get these cool sort of tails. which you then, if you add a compressor on afterwards, which here I'm using this, this is a band called Wolfpack actually, who made this compressor. It's like a 70s sort of emulation. It's got loads of like saturation and stuff like that, but yeah, it's pretty heavy compression, but it brings up all those tails at the end of the sound. And by doing that and changing the parameters of the reverb, you get these cool little artifacts at the end, which you can hear. And then I'll just start EQing afterwards. Not sure what this is doing here. And I'm basically EQing after every single stage, so you get some more control in the sound. And as well, you can use it as a filter, creating more movement, and then eventually adding on distortion. This is just a little, this is Trash 2, which is a really cool plugin. It's just like a basic little distortion on there. I said basic distortion, it's extremely loud. But yeah, this reverb's a bit too much as well. So yeah, I'll just sort of do this really, and then record this with Edison, which is FL's audio editor, and just play around with the Serum as well, so I get all these different movements and stuff like that. What I'm actually using here as well is the noise function on Serum, which is really cool, which I'll just show you actually. Which is linked to the filter, and then there's an LFO on the volume as well. This is just generates all sorts of noises. You got kick attacks and sort of environment sounds and stuff as well, which is really cool. But the LFO pattern is actually reversed on the level, so it actually only comes up after the main tonal part of the sound is played. So as you can hear, when the filter opens up, it comes in. It's very aggressive, but yeah. I'll sort of sit here, play around with the sound a bit, and take out little bits, basically. I don't know if anyone's seen me stream before, but I do this quite a lot, sort of resampling stuff. That's all I forgot here. So here's another little noise. So this one's got a bit more movement in the LFO, but it's pretty basic, sort of same sort of principle with the distortion, and then as well just a multiband compressor on at the end, which is really cool. And as well, with this sort of chain you've got set up, I'll base everything around that, and then I can just add in any synth really. So I'll try this guy. So this is a Mini Moog emulator, which sounds a bit rubbish on its own. Hold on, there it is. Sorry if this is a bit messy as well. I'll just try and clean it up a bit. So that's just going through the same chain as the Serum, so then I can essentially just play around with the synth and the cutoff and the filters. Just going to pitch this down an octave. And really it's just sort of looking for bass ingredients just to resample. And then I'll just bounce this out and then bring it back into the DAW. So I've got a lot of sort of samples here, aptly named, as you can see. Hold on. I'll try it and then you can listen to it. So So this is all just the same sort of process. It's just Serum being run through that chain that I'm showing you there, and then just sort of playing around with LFOs, recording large parts of the sample. It's pretty nasty, but but eventually you can get these, just sort of finding parts of the sound which you can use basically. So something like this, I can cut out and then I can use this. If I try this back here. So I'm just going to cut out those little bits, and then, oh, it's not that one that I want. And yeah, just take little bits from it, and I can start. And I can just start adding elements to that, some more like drums and layers and stuff like that, so I can go and get some pre-made drums, and it's essentially just sort of limiting the amount of time that you're sat there just playing around with the synth for a while, because I find if you're just recording long parts of the sample, taking smaller chunks out, you have to work with those chunks rather than, you know, you can sit here all day and just be like, and then you just sort of, you're still sound designing, but as long as you're recording all of that, that's great, because you can just take those little individual sounds, then bring them back in, and then work around those rather than trying to find something that works inside of the synth. It kind of limits you, but it's a good thing for me anyway. I find I prefer that kind of workflow. So if I can then go into, find some drum samples. Yeah. Can't hear them out of the DAW for some reason. Just copy this over. I mean, this is just like basic, but. And yeah, I'll basically just sit through and do this for hours and hours and hours, and eventually you amass a sample pack of your own material, and they're kind of like Lego bricks which build up the whole sound, and it just makes the process a lot faster, because if you have sessions dedicated to sound design, you don't have to sit and just have the pressure of like, I need to make a tune now, I need to make 32 bars of a track and it needs to sound great, because you've already got all those elements there to begin with. You don't have to just sit and make everything from scratch every time. If you've just amassed this huge library of sound, you can just do exactly this, which most people, especially drum and bass producers, will do this. We'll just drag stuff in and then just see what works. I mean, that sounds rubbish, but you know. And that's basically the process, but going into a bit more of Serum. Like I said, this is a pre-done sample, but it's a bit low. And as well, like having this mixer chain, because this is just the sound on its own, but then linked into that mixer chain I was showing you earlier, this guy, makes it sound a bit more interesting. And then when you're playing around with the wavetable positions, you get a lot. You get a lot more cool results out of it, rather than just starting from scratch every time, like I'm saying. So I'll have this as like a preset project that I'll go to, say if I'm making bass today, I'll just go in there and then link everything through that chain. And although it can sound quite samey, you can then go in and change all the different parameters that you've got inside of that mixer chain. You can change around parameters with the reverb. Record that and then just bounce it back in. You can use stuff like that as atmosphere as well, which is quite cool. So then I can just sort of cut out this. Oh, hold on. Ugh. Not doing very well with this. There we go. So I can just bounce that out now, and then oh, bring that back in, and then I can just sort of use that as a cool sort of effect, and then I'll get rid of all this so it's a bit easier to look at actually. Right, there we go. Get rid of this as well. So this is FL's sampler, which is quite simple, but gets the job done for me. But if you export this into Contact Sampler, for example, you get a lot more leeway with what you can do. You can add a lot more filters and stuff like that. So I'd view this as something like a crash effect. So then I'd just EQ out all of that bottom end. It's a bit of a nasty peak in there as well, which I'll get rid of. And something like that, layered with some crash cymbals or something, that might sound quite cool. So then bounce that out again. And yeah, that's pretty much bass design for me. Is there anything I could sort of go into a bit more if anyone wants to look at? Yeah.
Do you consider like a mono compatibility when you're doing sound design sessions?
Sometimes I do. I mean, I try not to go overly crazy with like with the stereo space. So I'll usually have isotope running. So if I'm, as you can see, this sounds a bit crazy in the stereo image there. But I'll have, oh, that's why, because that's boosted up for some reason. That's usually not boosted up like that, but so I'll have the sub all in mono. Actually, have a look. Yeah, so that lower sort of register there is quite stereo. I think it's this. So usually in Serum, I'll try and keep things a bit more mono, but then when I run it through that chain, obviously you're getting that massive wide reverb as well. That's a bit overdone, but so I just try to keep it relatively under control, but I don't really focus on it too much. It's not really like a prime focus. It's more sort of trying to find interesting layers and movements and stuff like that. Usually later on in the process, obviously, when you're mixing, that's when I'll focus on like how it sounds, you know, like mono, and especially Isotope's quite good with that because you've got all your different bands. You can turn it into mono just so you can listen to the whole thing. Your whole track in mono mix that way. But I try not to focus on it too much because it kind of kills the vibe of the sound design, you know. I'll probably get into drums now as well. So drums, I usually start out with a superior drummer, which is this, excuse me, this guy. And it's really cool plugin with lots of samples in it already, but you can control velocities and stuff like that. And you can change out the different samples, and then obviously alter envelopes and stuff like that, so you can make everything quite snappy and short. But for me, this sort of sound doesn't work with drum and bass too much because the live nature of the sound. So I'll usually take these samples out and then layer them with digital drums, like more sort of sample pack based material rather than just keep that sound. I mean, they can sound really cool. So I mean, even if I can add that chain on from earlier, even though it's a bass chain. And it might take a minute as well. Just not having fun with this today. There you go. That sounds terrible. So if I can just draw in a beat here. Hold on. But I'll tend to then take out all of the transients out of that sound. See, I mean, it doesn't sound particularly great in this instance, but more interesting. Also, it's got this weird EQ on it, which I'm not sure why that's there. And I'll use alloy, which is this guy here. I'll use the transient function on here to take out all those. Also going to change the pitch of that snare drum because it's pretty terrible, to be honest. That's a bit better. And then I'll usually just bounce those out. I'll just do that with the function here. Bring it out of here into the playlist. There you go, you can see it better here. So there's a big delay there, which that usually doesn't happen. So, and then I'll start actually layering this with digital samples. So you sort of get the best of both worlds. You get like a live sort of feel to it, and then you get the digital precision, and it makes it easier to mix usually. So I don't have any snares in there. So this snare just has like a nice sort of transient. Just cut that out and work on the snare for now. And I'll just EQ out of the layer, I'll just EQ out all of that muddy low end really. So this is the main sort of layer, transient layer. Just make it a bit shorter. And that's like a nice clean snare sound. So then I'll have that in a snare channel, which is here. I know FL's a bit weird to look at, but basically it's in its own channel. I'm going to mute that one. And I have two dedicated sidechain channels, which are these two. So I can just route everything through that rather than having to make a dedicated sidechain. Rather than having to sidechain everything manually, I can just run it through that one channel, kind of like a bus. And then that way everything's just running through here. As you can see here, it's sort of dipping down. So I can have this channel running into that sidechain channel. And then it can actually pitch that layer about a bit, make it a bit shorter. Do stuff like this. Just finding different sort of timbres of the sound. You can also affect that layer too. I like to put reverbs on quite a lot. there's still a bit of a transient coming through as well, so I can just remove that. Put alloy back on again. Yeah, there you go. But paying attention to the transients, that's like, it makes things so much easier to mix, especially. Just making sure your transients are very clean. And when you're layering drums like this as well, it can get really messy and obviously very muddy. So it's really important you pay attention to that, especially with the layers. If each has a click, and your main sort of transient layer, which is muted, if that isn't coming through cleanly, because if you're happy with that transient, and then you've got clicks and other sort of business on the top of it, then it can just sound quite nasty. So like I'm happy with that. I mean, I can bounce that out now and then use that as like another layer, or I can just use that as the main sort of snare. But generally, I won't go too crazy with how many layers I'm using, because I'll tend to resample even further down the line as I'm making tracks. Like I don't really go a bit overboard with layering here. But as for kicks, it's the same process. Like I just find I don't have any my own kicks in here for some reason, but I do just have a few samples here. Hold on. Yeah. There's like a, hold on. So for a kick, I'd usually use a very clean sort of digital pitch down like this, which is just, it's like a sine wave just being pitched down. I mean, it's a Vengeance sample as well, but I'll go through this process with the kick too, so I'll just cut that out. Like that doesn't seem like a big difference really, but I mean it's got a bit more character, and it does actually have a bit more of a natural feel to it rather than just straight up like electro kick, which same again, I'll just bounce that out and then use that as just a one shot for later on down the line. As for tops as well, for like hi-hats and stuff, Superior and like Addictive drummer, they're really good for that. If I just get rid of everything again. Pretty much everyone in drum and bass is using Superior and Addictive drums for stuff like hi-hats. You've got that live sort of feel. Which you can, hold on, I'm losing track of everything. So if I could go ahead and do this, and then there's that snare from earlier. Yeah. I'll just drag one in, whatever. And then I'll make a top layer for these, which is in here. So find them. And then I'll put that into the mixer. EQ it. And usually I put some distortion on there as well. So I put Camel Fat on that, which is a really, really, really cool plugin. Especially for top end. Put on the distortion here. and then I'll EQ out all of those lower frequencies too. A good tip is to just always EQ after every sort of layer you're putting on. So after compression, you can EQ again, and then distortion especially. Distortion is obviously a bit of a minefield with frequencies. So by putting EQs before and after, you get most control. So with bass, which I'll quickly go back to actually after this, you can create movement in the distortion rather than just distorting one clean signal and just having that sort of static distortion there. You can, by EQing before that, you can create movement in the distortion, which makes it sound quite cool. But so then I'll link that through that side chain, which I set up earlier. And that's like a basic break that I might use, so I can just bounce that out again, add that to the sample pack. Any questions so far about this, or not really?
Do you ever like sidechain hats?
Yeah, so this is what I'm doing here. So pretty much everything goes through the sidechain, like always for me. Unless it doesn't necessarily need to. But in drum and bass specifically, pretty much everything should be sidechained because you're just making sure that the kick and snare is just really clean, coming through every time. The snare isn't actually on that channel. So as you can see, this is just the kick and snare sidechain here. And those are just being dipped out, and pretty much everything's going through there. So if I was to add on like a sub here, should I just go down here for? Hold on. I've just put this in a mixer channel. And then find the note. And with that just going straight through into the sidechain. It doesn't make much of a difference here, but later on down the line when you're adding more and more layers, it's just, yeah, it saves you a lot of time while mixing. Because if you're mixing as you're going, then by the time you get to the end, your track's already mixed. You don't have to really pay much attention to that. Then you can just focus on making it louder at that point. Yeah, so that's, as you can see already from just this like 20 minutes or half an hour, I've already got like that's just a very basic 4-bar loop going, but I can then build off of this by adding more and more sounds to it. Excuse me. And this is a pre-made loop. So if I, alloy, no, please. So it appears alloy is crushed, which is wonderful timing. So that's just a little 4-bar loop that I've resampled. So I can actually layer this with that sub that I have going down here somewhere. Yeah. Just gonna copy and paste the drums over. Yeah, and that's pretty much how a session will start now. So after I've sort of dedicated a bit of time to just making sounds, it comes naturally after that because you've already amassed the material. You can just drag it in, cut it about now. And like with this, because you've just got like a standard sub just moving along, you can just cut this resampled bass into pieces, and you can start moving around the pattern as well, finding different movements that way. Just cut like and this way you can just find a hook. Like, I mean, I don't particularly think that sounds great, but you can do stuff like that, which is cool. That's a bit too much, but yeah. So generally, the sessions will kind of merge into one after a while. I'll go in the studio with this idea of I need to make snare drums today, I need to make bass noises today, but then eventually I'll just naturally moving to making little loops like this. And because you've already amassed the sounds, it's just so easy to start the session rather than making everything from scratch every single time. So it's a really good workflow tip for me. So that's cool. But generally everything just goes through those sort of stages. So if I'm doing atmosphere, I wouldn't use Serum for that. I'd probably use different techniques for atmosphere. So I'd probably use like a music box sort of sound, and I'd draw in some chords. Oh. It's like a basic sequence. And then I'll probably put reverbs on this. So then I'll bounce that out. Find that, which is here. And you can start doing cool stuff with this now and just stretching it out, pitching it around. One thing I use for atmospheres and synth stuff, I use Guitar Rig quite a lot for that. So it's got quite a lot of cool shimmer delays and stuff like that. Sure, I don't hear it. I mean, for the sake of time, I'll just use just one of these presets down here or something. It's just like a tape echo delay, which is really great for these sort of melodic movements and stuff. Some nasty peaks in there. So this is quite good for building soundscapes for intros and stuff like that. So I'm just going to make these longer so the tails are longer for when I resample this now. Then bounce this again. Music box 2. And then you can do stuff like reversing that, so then all of that reverb and delay, it basically turns it into a riser, which you can use before like a drop of a track or anywhere really, but that's all cool. So you can experiment doing stuff like this, running synths through tape echoes and stuff like that. That's a really good thing for like soundscapes and atmospheres and stuff. I'll use that quite a lot. Sorry, this keyboard's a bit. Yeah, so for sort of melodic stuff, I'll do that quite a lot. But contact libraries are the main source of it. So this is Oliver Arnolds. He's a composer, and he's done this contact. Well, he's done quite a few contact libraries, but he's got these old sort of Moog samples and stuff, which are obviously really beautiful. But you can use these for anything really. So if I put that back into that sort of. Get these really nice movements. I'm just going to boost this up quite a lot because it's quite soft. Space and stuff. But by altering these parameters you've got down here, get these really nice little movements and stuff. So with this you could go in two directions, I'd say. I could make that into like an atmosphere like I've done with the music box, or I could even put this through the mixer preset, the bass chain that I was doing earlier. Once again, might take a second. Bit loud, but. So all this kind of stuff you can just stick a recorder on at the end and just record the whole process, and then when if you're playing around with the sound, and I find something that I like, then I can just cut that out at the end of the session and then just take that piece rather than have all this taking up space. So I mean, even something like that at the end, it's got a nice sort of movement to it. Like that could even be used as just like a carrying bass line for a drum and bass track. Cut that out. On a third bass. I'm just going to make a new project actually because this is all too messy now. There we go. So I'll resample that back in. Turn it down a bit. I'll just take this part and then I'm going to make that. Actually, I meant that. Oh. So I'm going to take this part here. And I'm going to loop a section of it inside FL Sampler. Well, I was, and it's decided not to do it now. It's quite odd. I need to make it again. And then I can make this mono, actually. And then I can put that through the mixer chain again, and I can start putting it back through the chains. So a lot of resampling. I mean, it's good for computer processing if you've not got a very good computer, but it's just, you get a lot of outcomes you never would have before if you didn't really resample and just kept it all inside the synth. A bit much, but yeah. Hold on, just control this a bit more. So same again, I can just sort of record this and then cut the bits out, bring it back in. It's just the same process every time for each individual sound. And then before you know it, you've got a massive sample pack, basically. Is there any questions about that or anything anyone wants me to go into more about it, or? Nope. So I'll go into some aptly named projects. I'll go into a project now and sort of go into how I've worked sounds into the song. I think this is one. Yeah. So this is an older project, and I've actually done a lot of processing on a resampled bass, which I'll bring up. Which is where is it? Down here somewhere. Yeah. So that, without all of the stuff on, is that. So this is this is from Sample Pack. It's a very old project, but just like a standard re-space. And then here I've just put it into a filter, which I've automated here. So if I solo that, actually. And then I've just played in a bass line into that, and then I've EQ'd it, sort of removing some of the lower harmonics, which are all down here. And then I've got another EQ on, which is acting as a filter, sort of like a bandpass filter, sort of slowly sweeping across the frequencies. This is a pitch shifter. I think this is actually automated in later on as like a switch up or something. But then I've got that linked into this channel over here for some reason, which doesn't make any sense, but here I've got some overdrive and then a lot more effects, which I'll bring them in gradually. So with the overdrive going on after the filters and the EQ, then like I was saying earlier about the whole movement thing, you get a lot more interesting movements rather than if this was all being filtered after the distortion. So then I've got another distortion, which is trash, which sounds like this. I mean, this is basic, just some basic distortion here, nothing too crazy. I mean, it's just adding a bit of drive to the sound, nothing else. A bit more drive. Then this EQ is just cutting out the low and the high. And it'll also be there just for me to reference where the frequencies are at that stage. Then a reverb, which I think I've automated in as well. So I've automated the mix level of the reverb, which if I zoom into the playlist a bit more, which is this one here. So it's sort of and then another EQ. So with these sort of re-bass sounds dipping this sort of area, gives it a bit more of an authentic sound. And then I'm compressing again, because you can never have too much compression really. As you can see, that's a lot of compression, but if it sounds good, then it sounds good. EQing after the compression now, I'm just boosting the highs, and then I've got a little notch. There was probably a nasty frequency that I didn't really like. And then finally, I'm limiting it because there's a bit of a nasty sort of click, which I think is to do with the attack time of the compressor not being fast enough. But obviously not, so I'll just limit that now. And then I'm routing that into another mixer channel because I've sort of run out of effects here. So here I could have just resampled that, but I still wanted the control, and obviously because there's a lot of filtering going on here, I couldn't really do that. So with this channel, another sort of reference EQ, some more slight EQing. This is sort of bad practice because I'd add a little bit of EQing and then I'd add another EQ on top of that to make more slight adjustments rather than doing it all in one EQ. So I mean, there's a lot of EQs here. But like I said, this is an old project. I wouldn't necessarily work like this anymore, but I'd advise against doing that. But now I've got a double of two. this is just basically widening the high end or the mid highs of the bass, just make it sound a bit more interesting. But then with that, it introduces a lot of harsh low end and phasing as well. So what I've done to deal with that is I've added a Pro Q2, and I'm EQing the side signals rather than the mids or just the whole sound, which I sort of boosted this area as well because I wanted that to be more apparent in the sound, but obviously I've completely cut out the side frequencies. So this entire section here is in mono. Just makes it easier to control and mix, I guess. But with those harsh EQ curves that I've used, I've had to limit it again. So it's going through a lot of limiting and compression along these different stages, but it's mainly just to keep it so I've got a bit more headroom at the end of the chain, rather than having to deal with that at the end. I've just got some more EQ after that. And then, and more EQ and more. We got some multi-band compression going on in this sort of section here. It's just to control that. If you don't want to use EQ, which I obviously do, but I mean, I've got this Pro MB, which it's really good for sort of softening those sounds, and you can use these different bands, and it basically controls the amount each area is being compressed. But I've just got that up here right now. It's sort of like a less harsher sound. And finally, I've got another Pro Q2, which is doing the opposite of the multi-band compressor, which is quite odd. But anyway, and then that's going into the snare sidechain, the kick snare sidechain. So with this resampling method that I've gone for here, and it's a lot of work, but you know, it creates these quite interesting sounds that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get inside of just one instance of Serum or whatever. Drum-wise, I'm pretty sure I actually made the original drums on Addictive drums, so they're down here in the playlist. No, that's the bass. Hold on. Yeah, so I eventually swapped those out for just sampled drums. This is a good old Vec kick drum. So that's being played down here rather than up in the playlist. That's what I'd usually do, but seeing as it was made in Addictive, where I've sort of sequenced it, I've had to just replace it that way. So the snare, it's a layer of 3, which is this guy. It's a clap, one of my clean snare drums, and then I think it's actually an Addictive kick drum, snare drum, sorry. Yeah. Which is all going back through that side chain of the snare. Where am I now? So this clap is just going through reverb. And then just a bit of EQing. Pretty standard stuff. Yeah, and that's it. I mean, I've got a lot of sort of background effect samples here. Which, hold on. Let's show what this guy is. This is like a vocal sample, I think. Run through guitar rig. Yeah. And then run through some delays and stuff. And then I've automated the mix level of that delay on that sample. Yeah, that's that one. I'll go into like a newer project actually, because that's a bit crazy. There's lots of stuff going on there. So hold on. This one's newer. No, that's the same project. Just I know what I'm doing, I swear. I think it's this guy. Very imaginative names as well, as you can see. Another tip is don't name your projects like that. Okay, yeah, so this is quite cool. This is a newer one. The Serum is actually, there's two. So this is done with the noise generator in Serum, actually. So this is just a sine wave going through some distortions, but then afterwards the noise is it's just a slice of it. Oh, hold on. Yeah. It's just a repeating sort of noise, which comes in later. But then, as I was playing around with this, I sort of thought that's quite cool, and then essentially made a little tune out of that. But instead of resampling here, I've actually cloned the Serum. Oh, I'll play it. To create a bit more of a movement in this one. I think this one, the LFO is just being a bit more aggressive. Just opens up a bit more. So this is an instance where I haven't used resampling, where I usually would. And as well, because Serum's quite CPU heavy, and I'm using an older version of FL Studio, it's quite annoying. I can't really use more than 3 or 4 Serums to deal with that, but it's my own fault. So this is just going through some overdrive, obviously EQing. And it's being rammed pretty hard, but this is obviously early stages, so I'm not really focusing too much on the mix right now, having too much headroom and more sort of like in the vibe of the track. Oh, this is there we go. It's a very nasty noise. Ah. So that's just a sample. I think it's just yeah, just like a cool atmospheric sample. But I've used the FL sampler down here. It adds this sort of cool ring modulation, and just sort of cut off that first little part of it, which is down here. Makes this cool sort of crash sort of or hi-hat thing. Yeah, and then I just build off of that for the rest of the session, really. For the master, I'll usually mix into ozone, which is just making the sub mono, and then just like a soft limiter. And then afterwards I've got like a Pro L, which is just bringing everything back up again. That's just for general loudness. Like I say, just keeping a vibe going rather than focusing too much on the mix. And it also gives you a good idea of where the track's going to be at level-wise when you come to mixing it. That's that, really. Yeah. Is there anything anyone wants me to go into more about this, or?
When the track starts coming to like the later stages or the finishing stages, and then you do start thinking about mix down, would you then take the dynamic processing off the master, say before you send it to mastering, or?
Yeah, so it depends on the track, because obviously, like older tracks, especially my ones, I don't know if anyone's seen, I did a tutorial for a track I did called Monolith, where I didn't really know what I was doing. So I just sort of rammed everything into the reds and didn't really think about it too much. So when it came to mastering, what I actually did was, when I took the limiter off on the end, like here it's still being rammed a bit, but generally the tune's there. I mean, it's mainly the kick and the snare, so usually what I'd do is I'd keep the limiter on, and then, as you can see, the input signal here is pretty hot, so I'd drag the input gain down. This is a bad example because I haven't obviously mixed any of this yet. It's just sort of been rammed in. But then I'd turn the kick and snare down a bit on here, then lower the output, so then the engineer's got a bit more headroom. But a lot of people in drum and bass especially, they won't even focus on that. They'll leave the limiter on, just drag the volume down a little bit, and then send it out. Most people, I do as well, I kind of view it as one process, like mixing and mastering, rather than like thinking about that at the end. It's sort of, the whole thing's one process for me, unless it's being cut to vinyl or something like that. So you do have to kind of be conscious about it. And I think, especially in this kind of genre, a lot of the rules for mastering kind of go out the window a little bit with it. So I wouldn't focus too much on it. I mean, if it does sound good, it's hard when if you're ramming everything in the master limiter rather than sort of little, if you're limiting along the way on each individual channels, if you're ramming it pretty hard that way, at the end when you take the mastering limiter off, it doesn't matter because you've still got all your headroom there. Yeah, I could take some questions if anyone wants me to go into anything that they've got questions about. Or, yeah.
Say you've got your sub bass and everything. Would you stick to any like guidelines on how loud that is at all?
How loud the sub is? Yeah. Generally, just through monitoring and getting a feel for it. I mean, obviously, you kind of know when the sub's too loud, especially if you're, for example, if I open up that bass project again, there it is. So here, this actually doesn't have a sub on. So this is why I like Serum a lot as well, because with sub, you can have the sub as its own oscillator that you can just put straight out and then not have to worry about it because it's not being affected by anything apart from stuff you put on afterwards. So this is just being affected by the chain afterwards. So inside the synth, that sounds quite cool. But you just kind of get an ear for it of like where where the sound is with sub. You can always as well just turn the sub off inside of Serum, bounce it out, and then just EQ out everything in that range, and then you can just have a sine wave oscillator running alongside it. It's not that. So you can just have your really clean tone and just layer that with it if that is a problem. But generally, I kind of like I try as much as possible to keep the sub as part of one sound rather than splitting it off, because I find it keeps the movement and just it just sounds better to my ears really, rather than having just like, it sounds very clean and digital. And with drum and bass, if everyone's so focused on achieving that sort of analog and vibe sort of thing rather than going overly digital. So yeah, so that's it for sub really. Cool. Yeah, any other questions?
Yeah. I was going to ask, when you had that loop that you were cutting up,
Yeah.
And it kind of sounded like a kind of chord, like the bass had like a chord within it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Could you like explain at all how you made that kind of sound? I hear it a lot in like a lot of like De Niro kind of stuff. I don't know if it is actually a chord or whatever.
It was probably, so it would have been like the harmonics of the bass. So if I'm, let's see. I'll just put a new patch through this actually. Hold on. So usually I'll actually, the second wavetable, I'll give it, excuse me, I'll give it another note and add it like an added harmonic on top of that, which you can then pitch up by different semitones. I find 10 is quite nice. Actually. See, as the sound progresses, the harmonics are interacting with each other. And you get those sort of overtones, and yeah, it probably sounds like a chord. As well, a lot when I'm resampling, I'll use the FLs, that ring modulation sort of thing down here, which sort of adds more overtones as well, more harmonics. Is there any sort of like tracks in particular you've heard that in?
I can't think off the top of my head. It's more like I really can't think that. It was literally just that loop that you were cutting up when you first started adding some drums to it.
Yeah.
It was in there, but yeah, I can't think of the tune off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was just probably just like natural, or say natural, but like harmonics in the movement. When I was originally playing around with it, it would have just been like the LFO opening up and then revealing the extra harmonic that comes out on top. In here somewhere. I think it was this guy. Was it this sort of sound or?
No, I don't think it was. No,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Any more?
You know, in when you did Mind Games, was it? I think it was the VIP.
Yeah.
In the intro, that bass, like, because it's constantly like evolving. How did you achieve that?
I remember that was through the whole resampling thing.
Okay.
Same sort of thing. I think it was just it would have just been a short movement. I think so. If I find one here. So like this guy. If I bounce him up. Oh. Oh, I can't see it. By adding these sort of crossfade loops in with the sampler, you get that sort of natural movement right here. Sorry, I can't see it. And then obviously doing the whole thing where you make it in mono and then you can play it and then move it around a bit. And it was a similar sort of concept with that sound. And obviously, because that crossfade loop is static, like the higher up, like it's quicker, so you can get that naturally sort of evolving sound with it. So when you play it in, I think it was just played in with like pitch bends on here, which you can do like this. And then, yeah, adding filters on afterwards, and you just create more movement that way. It's quite cool as well if you don't really have many ideas, if you just, you can just sort of stick with a one-note bass line that repeats like that, and then just add a drum loop on top of it, and it sounds pretty cool. Then you just sort of find a different place for the loop. Yeah, stuff like that, which is pretty fun. So, cool.
So you don't really worry about like having things like sticking to the grid?
Not always, but that's the sort of, that is the main issue with doing it this way, is then you can't really see where it is on a grid, and if your crossfade loop isn't in the right point, but it sounds good, you're going to have to like bounce it back out and then sort of like stretch it around a bit more. A contact sampler is, I'd recommend for doing this, to be honest. Like the only reason I really use this anymore is because it's sort of ingrained in me and it's just like really quick for me to use. Whereas contact sampler, I don't really use it, but I know a lot of people who do. They'll sort of, if they go in here, I can't remember how you actually open everything up. Here you go. Oh. Yeah, forgive me, I've never really used this much. But yeah, there's a few tutorials I recommend like looking into how to use this. But then you can control like the amount of time between each crossfade loop, and then you can stretch it around, and if you've got issues with timing and stuff like that. But a lot of the time, if you've got weird sort of timings on your movement, with the right break, it can sound kind of cool. I think that's why this weird jump up neuro thing that's happening right now, it sounds really cool, is because people aren't really paying attention too much to where the grid is. It's more about like how the bass line sort of grooves with the track, rather than it must be perfect, everything must be on the grid and stuff like that. Whereas if you just got like a cool vibe and you can move to it, then that's the most important thing. For me as well, I think that's, yeah. I prefer to have everything slightly off and a bit more funkier than everything super static, and yeah. But yeah, it is an issue, but to get around that, I'd sort of resampled that movement again and then drag that back in and just have it as its own little thing which you can move around.
Did I see in your folder of projects that you've got a leveler collab going?
No, I don't know what you're talking about. No, I don't, no. Yeah, we're working on something. It sounds pretty cool, but I don't really want to show any new stuff because it's sort of like, it's all kind of work in progress at the minute, unfortunately.
Like when you're collaborating, how do you like kind of like not tread on other people's toes, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. It is quite hard, especially collaborating. I was just in Iceland actually with the Upbeats and Culture Shock, and that was quite hard actually because obviously dealing with those, not dealing with, but like having those personalities where you're wanting the track to go in a different direction, or there's a sound that you really like and then the other guys hate, and then you really hate the sound that they really like, and then it's sort of it's a lot of compromise, to be honest. But then that's the whole point of collaborating anyway, isn't it? It's just sort of you're getting another perspective, and then although you might not agree with it, it'll end up just sounding like a certain way or something that you wouldn't have come up with on your own. So it depends on how precious you are, I guess. But I think with this leveler thing, it's been quite good so far because it's just sort of been, let's just see where it goes, rather than, and it's better to have that mentality rather than like, oh, this is the track and it's going to sound like this forever. It's sort of, you can't really decide that from minute one because the whole process, it's all kind of subconscious a lot of the time. You're just reacting to what's happening as you're making these decisions in your head, and you end up with, yeah, something. If you just have this preconceived notion of like, this is what it's going to sound like when I've finished the track, you'll never get there, because it's like trying to remake someone else's track from scratch, like, and make it sound exactly the same. It's never going to happen. So, yeah.
So it's good to like take a step back.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, especially when it's like everyone's quite a strong personality, and it's like, it needs to be this way. Yeah, just take a step back and be like, all right, you work on that for a bit, I'll try something else, and then, yeah, definitely. Cool. Any other questions?
What are the key things you picked up then through your collaborations that you've done? What memory-wise, what sticks out for you? The thing you kind of saw someone else doing, and you're like, oh, right.
The contact sampler thing, definitely. Jeremy from the Upbeats, he was using that quite a lot. And as well, with that, you can add more filters and stuff as well inside of the sampler, and then just bend the sound even further. Whereas FL sampler, it's quite limited, really. It's just a very basic sampler. Sort of sound goes in, you can reverse it. You do have like all this like ADSR and stuff here, which is still cool, but it's just kind of basic. Whereas the contact one's a lot more in depth. So there's definitely a few techniques I picked up on. It was like, yeah, that was really, write a few plugin names down and stuff like that. But in terms of collaborating, I think, just the whole taking a step back thing, and not trying to be overly controlling of what's happening. That's definitely it's good advice if you're collaborating in the future, I think. It's like a relationship, I guess. It's just like mutual compromise, isn't it? But, yeah. Yep.
Do you still use the FL vocoder quite a lot? Because in the early days, that's something I quite associated with your sound.
Yeah, definitely. I do. Yeah, I do a bit, but that's the whole problem. Is it's got such a signature sound. So I mean, I could even add it here. See, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, it sounds great. Just like the default sound. Yeah. I might start using it again now. Thanks. It's kind of like a bit of a cheat. It's like a cheat trick, because you just thought, it sounds it's not really going anywhere. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's fine. It's really good now. So, yeah, I've tried to steer away from it because of that, because it's quite hard to get it to not sound like vocodec, which I guess is not the point. It's a bit of a nasty frequency in there, but yeah, I think I'll probably start using that again. Thanks. Yeah. Any other questions?
When you're collaborating, how many times does the song usually go back and forth?
It depends on how you do it. So if you're doing it online, so for this leveler one, that's only been sent. He made a track and then he stemmed it and sent it to me, and then I'm working on it right now. Excuse me. And then I'll send that back to him, and it'll be more of a online situation, which it's got its perks, because you can sort of forget about it. You can do your bit, and then you don't have to think about it while the other person works on it. But then if they send something back and you don't like it, they've gone through this massive process, and you've just said, no, I don't want it. I don't like it. Change it all back. But if you're in the room with them, you just make those decisions straight away. So it's like, is this good? Is this bad? No, yes. So it's a lot quicker when you're in the same room. So I'd recommend doing it that way. But online is it works for some people though. So I know the Upbeats do it online mostly. Like they both got their own studios. Do you do a lot of collaborating then? Is it like a...
a bit. Well, me and Joe.
Okay.
Go into each other's rooms.
Yeah. But I mean, the process is like the same for most people, even for like the noisier guys. I know they all have their own separate studios, but it's more sort of like they'll always have that one session at the end. But yeah, it's definitely really hard sometimes. Like you do get lots of arguments and stuff. Yeah, but you can usually get something that's bigger than what it would have been if it was just you on your own.
When you're planning a song, do you start with the drop?
Cheers, man.
And then go on to the breakdown, or start with an intro? How's your work process?
Usually always start with the main section of the track, because I just feel like that's the main. With drum and bass, it's a lot easier, because it's quite repetitive in that way. It's always built around one idea. So starting with the drop of the track, you just know straight away. It's like you know where this is going. Where I feel whenever I try and make intros, into a track. It's like it never sort of fits because you're trying to create two separate tracks for one thing rather than just making one track and building it around that one section. It's a lot easier to do it that way. So I think it's a lot easier, yeah, to work around the main section of the track rather than doing intros. But it's always good to just work on sort of intros as an exercise rather than having so I did this like scoring experiment thing. Just started out as pianos and stuff like that, but then it gradually sort of a bit quiet, but so this was originally going to be like the intro to a drum and bass track, but then I found as it eventually obviously came to the end of where the drum and bass track would start, I couldn't figure anything out that fit with that because I've already made everything in the intro rather than the other way around. And as well, if you're working on the main section of the track, you've already got all your sounds there, so you know how to introduce those elements, and you can bring those back to the intro, and then you can like filter them and put on reverbs and stuff like that, and then just giving the listener the idea. It's like, oh, this sound is going to come in and it's going to sound roughly the same as that, and it's sort of, rather than surprising everyone, it's just like, oh no, now it's the drum and bass track out of nowhere. It's yeah, it's a lot better to work that way, personally anyway. So yeah.
I have two questions now. After doing that, do you have any formal music training?
No, it's all by ear.
Okay.
It's I think it's sort of more like a natural. I mean, got taught piano from a young age, but then I sort of gave up and then just started pressing F for drum and bass music, and then. But a lot of this is more just sort of listening to music and picking out chord sequences that work. And
do you use any sort of like tools to like, so you're sticking within a key or something?
It's more sort of like natural. Like I'll pick. Excuse me, sorry, my voice is all over the place today. So I'll kind of know which chords work. And then when I'm sequencing, I'll usually even just play it in on the piano roll as opposed to playing it out and then recording it that way. But some people prefer doing that, recording it as they're playing it. But I'll usually just sequence it in. So all these are like artificial. I've dragged it off the grid a bit to make it sound more like it's being played, and then altered the velocities as well, so that's a bit more, especially with pianos. And then the rest of the track's just sort of like, sort of mimicking that chord sequence just in different ways, and then.
And then I also, you used to use oligarch quite a lot, didn't you? And you haven't mentioned that at all this time. Is that something you still draw for much, or no?
No, same as like the vocodex thing. It just, after a while, it just sort of, I couldn't get it to sound any different. It just sounded like oligarch every time I put it on something. Which is fine, but I mean, but it's the same. So like this bass chain that I was making earlier, like I won't just use that forever. I'll kind of exhaust the possibilities of the sound that I can get out of it, and then I'll just move on to something else, and then try and figure out maybe just find a different plugin or a different way of working, because otherwise you're just going to get the same result every time. So the same with vocodex, everything sounded like vocodex, everything sounded like oligarch. So really just trying to figure out different ways of making things sound good with different plugins, even if they do the same thing. So with that bass chain, for example, I could switch out all the distortions that I've got on there and then use different plugins. And it'd sound different because obviously it's different distortions, even though it's doing the same thing. Yeah, no oligarch anymore, I don't think. But it's quite cool. Like, I'd recommend using that if I still have it. I don't even know if I have it still. Oh, yeah, I do. Oh, no, I don't. Oh, it's because it's on here. There you go. This is oligarch. It's like a phaser and a filter and chorus, and it kind of sounds really cool for basses. But yeah, it just sort of sounds the same. Everything you put through it just sounds like that. So yeah, cool. Yeah.
Just carrying on from like the collaboration discussion. Is there anyone you haven't worked with within the D&D industry that one day, well, without sounding like too much of a fanboy, that you'd like to make a track with?
For a long time, it's been the Upbeats actually, but then this Iceland tour has just been a really good timing. But I think I'd like to work with Spore, but at the same time, I'm not sure.
What about something like contrasting, like breaking?
Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it. I think because you sort of, well, it's not like a blanket term because some people. So, for example, like Mepheus, I've obviously worked with quite a lot, and we have very contrasting ways of producing that when we put it together, it just made this really cool, outcome, which worked really well. Whereas if I've worked with people in the past who we've had that, like opposite ways of working, and they've been more sort of like technically like, oh, it needs to be more controlled here, or, sort of interrupting the workflow. And then we never made anything because it just sort of stagnated and we got too hung up on different processes. But it's hard. It's like some days it might work and some days it won't as well. So it's quite hard to say like who I'd like to work with, to be honest. But
living in Bristol, surely that's opened some avenues for
definitely.
extra collaboration.
Yeah, definitely. Don't know. I want to hit up Charlie Break. I think that'd be cool. So if he's about. Yeah, he's like a ninja. He's just like got no phone or email or anything. But yeah, one day hopefully, Charlie, come and collaborate. But yeah.
Was there like a tune or an artist that like made you realise that's what I want to make, like the drum and bass? Is there anything that like really spurred you towards it?
Yeah, it was definitely like Noisy and Sport back then. It was, I think it's 2006, I think. Yeah, around that time when they were all, and Vision was just sort of starting out as well. That was a huge influence. And then it seemed back then every release was like quite new and different. Whereas I feel like now it's sort of come to a point where the scene's quite saturated. So not in the way that the music's bad, it's just there's a lot of music nowadays. So a lot of it's sounding quite similar. It's I don't know, it's probably just nostalgia though, you like the stuff you first heard when it was all new and amazing. So I don't know, maybe it was the same back then, but yeah, Noisy and Spore for sure, like they were the dudes. Still are, but yeah, definitely. Any more questions or? Oh, sorry, man.
You found like making other different types of music, like side projects, helped you out with like creativity in the process of making the drum and bass?
Yeah, I think so. Having a break from it's a huge draw, because if you just sat there all day just doing the same thing over and over and you're trying to make it work, and it's hard not to get bored of just doing the same thing, unless, I don't know, some people are just crazy and they can just listen to the same thing over and over again and just be like, and that makes them happy, and that's great. And especially if you're creative, because if you're constantly just in love with what you're listening to and what you're doing, then it's really good to be able to do that. But for me personally, I just need different things. I think it's why I work really fast as well, because if I just get bored with the same idea over and over again, just playing it and playing it and playing it and trying to mix it as I go, it's just sort of like becomes monotonous, and then I just get annoyed. So yeah, having a break and going and doing something like, I'm gonna do like a scoring experiment, or I'm gonna try making some rhythm dubstep or something. Just anything that's just different to what you're doing, and as well, because you're producing it in a different way, you can learn techniques that you can then reapply back into what you what you want to do as a main project. So it's definitely a good idea to do that. If you find you're sort of stagnating a bit, I'd definitely do that. Cool.
What's Indian gent?
I don't know if we want to listen to that. I think, so there's a video and it's like this weird rhythmic, this guy. It's this weird, it's like a rhythmic Indian singing and it's just the vocals on its own. Let's see if I can try and...
It's like gent.
Yeah, but I recorded some 8-string guitar on it and put some drums on it. So this is the sample. Hold on. No, that's my bass. Hold on. That's here. If I put this on.
Di tom nam tarigida dagata di tom nam tarigida dagata.
It sort of goes on like this, and I chopped it all up, and then I put 8-string guitars on it, and then it sounds like this. Yeah, if you don't like metal, that's probably horrible, but there you go. So, yeah. So that's that. Please don't make me do that again.
You find that sort of like other influences from other genres kind of work their way into your drum and bass?
Yeah. To be honest, like most of the time I don't really listen to drum and bass unless it's like a big release. I only really listen to a few artists if they release something new. Most of the time, yeah, I'll listen to like metal or just all sorts of music really. Like really excited for the new John Hopkins thing, and yeah, bringing those influences in, it just means you're not just doing the same thing as everyone else is doing, I guess. I mean, some would argue that I am doing, the same sort of thing, but yeah, personally, it's just a good way to just stay inspired. Like I was saying earlier, it's just, if you're just listening to the same ideas over and over again, you're just going to keep trying to make that rather than like, oh yeah, I'll try and put some Indian rhythmic vocals into a drum and bass tune. That might actually sound quite cool. So yeah, just trying, as an artist especially, you just got to try and push something new forward that it might sound weird or like a bit sort of challenging to people because it's not what they're used to, but that's the whole point. It sort of moves it forward a bit. So yeah, do more weird stuff. It's good. Cool. Any more questions?
Do you ever sort of like plan projects out, or do you just literally go for it?
Like, as in like have sort of an idea of where it's going to go?
Yeah,
or?
I was trying to sort of collect different ideas and sort of bring them together, or would you just go and explore and...
Kind of both. I think a lot of the times you'll go in the studio and you've got like a bass line in your head or something. It's like, oh, I'm going to make a bass that sounds like this thing. But then you'll find 90% of the time you just end up in this really other weird direction that you're just responding to what's happening on the screen and what the synth's doing and how you're processing it, and it just ends up going in some completely different direction, which is really good too. But yeah, most of the time, if I have a brief of something I want to do, it'll end up just completely different. So it's quite hard. It's like I said earlier, it's like trying to remake somebody else's track and it be exactly like it is there, because it's just never going to happen, and you're just going to end up in some other. Yeah, exactly. So.
Oh yeah, well, another one. Do you, with all your resampling stuff, do you have a method of sort of saving that, so that organising it so that you can come back to it? It's quite intuitive.
Well, now I'm a little better at it.
So it just scares me about doing lots of resampling.
Yeah, like it is sort of. So for example, here I've just inside FL. It's got this really cool. I probably should have said earlier actually. That's the whole point. So if I cut out like a little bit of the long sample that I've got, like this is like a big 4-minute sample of me just playing around. You right click on that and make unique, and then that creates its own like little version of that whole sound. And then when you save that, it just appears in here as like part 1, part 2, part 3. So here it's like Serum Mess Around 2, and then I've got like little offshoots of it. I mean, I can't really play it because the sound card's not going through that, but yeah, so these are just like little bits that I've like cut out, and it makes it a lot easier to deal with. Whereas if you're yeah, if you're quite unorganised, it can get a bit overbearing. But I tend to just keep it all lumped in the same sort of project and stuff, and it's sort of, yeah, a lot easier to deal with. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
Final questions before we wrap up?
You know, you use lots of like little vocal edits, like little just things that jump out at you in tunes.
Yeah.
Will you just be watching something and you'll hear about, like, if someone says something, you'll be like, that could be cool?
Yeah, definitely. Quotes from films and that. A lot of it, it's hard to try and find that like a really cool vocal from a film that no one's used yet. Yeah. So usually it's sort of, you can even record vocals yourself. So like the Upbeats and Culture Shock thing we did, the main sort of title of the track, one of us recorded the vocals and then we've like processed that in a way and then sort of brought it back in the track. But a lot of it's sort of like digging just online for weird sample packs, and so I've got like this one, I don't know where it's from, but it's got like this huge pack of just vocals and... Excuse me, it's a family show, sorry, you might have to bleep that out, sorry about that. Can you just get these like little... Yeah, you just get these weird old samples that you can eventually cut things out of. These all have like stuff on the background though, so it's obviously not a very good vocal pack, but... Anyway, yeah, but a lot of it's sort of digging and finding weird samples and then processing them and stuff like that. But yeah, if you're in doubt, just record them yourself. Just like say it really cool into a microphone. Yeah, that always works, but yeah.
Is there any reason you're running Windows on Mac?
Oh, right now, no, this isn't my Mac. It's a very expensive monitor right now. Like that's all it's doing, but yeah, it's all down here. But I'd prefer to be running Windows 7, but I'm just too Windows 10, sorry, but I'm just too lazy to update everything. And even like this is the old version of FL Studio, so it's just sort of, it's all old stuff, but I'm just too lazy to update everything. Yeah. Yep.
Do you produce on other DAWs as well?
No, always on FL. I tried Ableton out, which I thought was cool, but I think when you've been using something for so long, it's just ingrained in your workflow. It's quite hard to move on to something else, even if it's better or better suited to your purpose. I think, yeah, FL's just really good for my workflow. I think it's just really fast. It's easy for me to just quickly get a loop down and start playing with it rather than like sat there just, you know, processing things over hours and hours and hours. I just get too bored. So yeah, it helps having a little quick thing like this. I mean, nowadays this FL is just as powerful as every other DAW, and they all are now, really. It's more just sort of what works for your workflow now. I think that's the main question. So yeah, don't let anyone tell you that their DAW is better than theirs or whatever, because it's all the same now. They're all so good. But yeah. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for watching, guys. That was my sound design process. I hope you learned something. Thanks to the DBS Music guys for having me, and I'll catch you again soon. Peace.